Hello and welcome to Consumer Choice Radio, right here on the Big Talker FM 106.7. It's going to be a great program. We're broadcasting live from Davos, Switzerland, and the World Economic Forum. Hello and welcome. I'm one of your hosts, Yaël Ossowski, Consumer Choice Radio, and I'm joined, as always, by my very reliable co-host, Mr. David Clement. How you doing, David?
Doing well. We've spent the week here in the mountains. Interesting content all week. Looking forward to talking to listeners about what's going on and what the takeaways are.
Yeah, I don't know how many good radio programs we're going to have coming out of Davos. Certainly not with our opinion. So get it right
not.
there. Yeah, but this is the first time that we're doing this together in person, so I think it's going to be a good experiment. Good to see how this goes.
Absolutely.
A lot of stuff to cover. Great things that we were able to participate in, not just walking in and flashing our badges and business cards, but also being great organizers on the mountain. So that's great stuff. So once again, if you're joining Consumer Choice Radio, we're at consumerchoiceradio.com. There you can subscribe to the show if you would like to receive it in podcast form, or we're always live on the radio Saturdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on the Big Talker FM 106.7. So David, let's dive into this. We've got a couple things here on the list, things to talk about, discuss. We're here at the World Economic Forum, Davos, Switzerland, middle of nowhere. This is the second time that we've come as a group. Not many people get to come here apart from millionaires and billionaires, if you read the headlines. So
yeah, it's a unique scenario for us. Obviously, we are not in the millionaires and billionaires category, but still a great week. A lot of interesting content, a lot of interesting people that we got to speak to, and things we got to participate in. I think the big kind of takeaway for us is that it's super important for those who care about freedom and liberty to be in these conversations, because so many of these kind of world-class events often completely ignore any type of concept of individual liberty, freedom, free markets. And so for us to be here, for us to participate, it's been a great week. A lot of people have a lot of negative things to say about the WEF, but it's great that we're here. It's great that we get to have our voice heard on so many different issues.
And the typical criticism of the World Economic Forum is you have this incredibly elite gathering, people flying in on their private jets, talking to the rest of us, the middle class, and all the rest of how we should live our lives. This is where the millionaires and the billionaires and all the state leaders are getting together and conspiring and cooking up deals. That's the normal criticism. I think at this point it's very lazy thinking, because groups like ours, we're able to organize things right here in Davos. No one's stopping us from doing that, and we're able to reach people just as easily as anyone walking down the street. So I think there's a lot of advantage there if you can actually be here and make an impact. And speaking of that, the theme this year of the World Economic Forum was sustainability. Sustainability.
Yes, sustainability, which I think when people are critical of the WEF, there was a great cartoon. I believe it was published by, or at least publicized by, Bjorn Lomborg. And the cartoon, for those who have not seen it, is all of these, let's say, billionaires and millionaires rushing off of their private jets and saying, hurry up, we have to go hear Greta's talk at the World Economic Forum. And so I think that highlights some of the irritation with an event like this and the obvious hypocrisy of flying here in your private jet. We got here the old-fashioned way of cars and trains, and not on a private jet, unfortunately. But yeah, sustainability was the theme. How do we create a more environmentally friendly and conscious and sustainable future? I think that's something that everybody can agree upon in terms of its goal. Where we probably disagree is on how we get there and what mechanisms we use to actually have a sustainable future.
Yeah. And to give more background on this conference was started, now 50 years ago. It's a 50-year anniversary this year.
I believe something along those lines.
So 50-year anniversary, started by, I believe his name was Klaus Schwab.
Yep.
And his idea was to just bring together people with very important ideas and find a forum for them to talk about economics, the economies of the world, how we can participate in just kind of global order. It's evolved from being this tiny gathering to now one of the most important part of the year. Companies spend millions of dollars to have access to buildings and restaurants. You have a lot of world delegations of entire countries where you have ministers, many world leaders take their helicopters and planes and fly in. Again, this is in this tiny village, tiny ski village in Switzerland. We're about 2 hours south of Zurich. This is, again, fascinating to be in this tiny town, which for the 1 week that we're here, basically everything is shut down, police presence everywhere, everyone's required to have a badge. All the prices are at least 3 times higher than they normally are.
Yes.
It's definitely a super crazy environment to be in. So that's small ski village, now the world, I guess, meeting place for the most important.
Yeah, and nothing highlights that more when you get the bill for your pizza and it's $30.
Yeah, that's typical Swiss, and then you add a little bit of Davos flavoring, and the World Economic Forum tends to do that. It's tough. I mean, being here is obviously exciting, and there are good chances, as we have, that you bump into very famous or important people or not important people. What are a few on the list, actually, that we're able to see or bump shoulders with, at least some of the people in our group as well at Consumer Choice Center?
Yeah, one was the, I don't know if the proper term is chairman or president of the World Health Organization.
Yeah, Director General.
He was, Director General. He was here. He certainly got a lot on his hands now, given this virus outbreak that seems to be hopeful. Well, it seems to be spreading, but we obviously, God willing, it does not.
Yeah, this coronavirus, big deal. I guess we'll be talking about that more in the days. Apparently, they're closing down all the flights and restricting travel, and things are unfolding. So a lot there. Let's see who else. We definitely saw Bill Browder. Those of you who might know him, he's an activist related to the Magnitsky Act. He was a businessman in Russia, and he's done a lot to kind of counter authoritarian regimes.
Yeah, Tony Blair was here.
Tony Blair, that's right.
Former Prime Minister. UK Prime Minister, he was here.
Yeah, Prime Minister of Luxembourg, was able to see him very shortly.
Yeah. One of our colleagues had a great conversation with him about what goes on in Luxembourg and what their goal of being here at the WEF is.
Great story, though, of the Prime Minister of Luxembourg is, as happens in Davos, there's many companies that rent out entire lounges and buildings in the hotel, the main hotel, and you're able to set up meeting space. And actually, I was waiting with our colleague Bill Wietz. He was going to interview the Prime Minister. Prime Minister said, "Why don't I just come on in and we can do the interview there." Then Prime Minister walks in. He's got his press person. He's got his security person. And then at that point, somebody from the lounge gets up and says, "I'm sorry, no media, sir. No media. We're not allowed to do media here." So unfortunately, they're shepherded off to another room. The guy comes back, and after he realizes, he goes, "I think I just kicked out the Prime Minister of Luxembourg." I don't know. Do we have business there?
Yeah, hopefully that doesn't go up the chain, because somebody's probably going to get reprimanded for that.
That could be bad, yeah. And I think one important point to talk about when it comes to World Economic Forum is, we're talking about being into the hotel and some of the events, but it's very, very much a two-tier type of event.
Yes, absolutely. You have the formal WEF, we're talking $100,000 tickets, heads of state, and then, at least in my opinion, you have the secondary events. That's where all the good stuff happens. That's where a lot more of the creativity of that global kind of marketplace of ideas, that's where it's at. That's where you have various different groups, whether they're like us or not. They host side events, they have receptions, they host panels on a variety of different topics outside of that main theme. That is where a lot of value really comes. And actually, what's ironic is if you attend a lot of these side events, you'll see what they will call the white badge people. Those are the people who have those full WEF tickets. You'll see them slowly creep out of the conference center space, which is the super restricted space, and end up in all of these much more exciting and invigorating side events like the one that we hosted.
Oh, funner stuff, better food, better topics.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's definitely the kind of tiered system that is very interesting. So it's actually not as restricted as people might assume. You're listening to Consumer Choice Radio here on the Big Talker FM 106.7. We're broadcasting to you from Davos, Switzerland, here alongside the World Economic Forum. It's our second time here as a group as the Consumer Choice Center. We've got some of the links, and I'm going to put some of the cartoons on our website as well, consumerchoiceradio.com, so you can follow on that. And we mentioned the white badges, we mentioned the stage, and if any of you caught any kind of the coverage of Davos, that's actually what you saw. You don't really see the coverage of the secondary events. Maybe more will come out. But what were the big headlines out of Davos? We had big speeches by Greta Thunberg. That's very true.
Yep, she was back just like she was here last year.
Yep, she's fairly elite if she can get a white badge worth 100,000 2 years in a row. She's doing something right.
She might now actually be part of the global elite.
Well, at this point, yes. If you have a certain number of social media followers, if you've been able to take a boat across the ocean in 2019 or 2020, that's kind of elitism.
I don't think the term boat is the right. I think the appropriate term is a yacht.
Oh, I'm sorry, sailing yacht. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the official part. So you had some news organizations that were streaming that, and some heads of state. Obviously, who's the big newsmaker in town? Who's the one that's going to make everybody ticked off?
The Donald.
Donald Trump, President of the United States. He was able to make a show, and he made a show. He came in, gave his speech. A lot of it was about Trump. A lot of the build-up and anticipation to the World Economic Forum was about, what is Trump going to say? Last year, Trump and the administration were not present in Davos. They had opted at that point to work more on some of the pressing legislation and issues and things that were going on. So now we actually have Trump, and we have the American contingent. And we do have Trump's speech, a little clip here. David, do you want to listen to a little bit of this?
Yeah. Let's give listeners a bit of a taste of what President Trump had to say at the WEF.
So it's going to be interesting because this is Trump giving his speech. This is worldwide. You'd assume you're going to get the normal Trump personality. Fairly interesting for us to listen to. Let's listen to President Trump and his speech at the World Economic Forum. Starting 1, 2, 3 now.
And researchers leading the way. We are on the threshold of virtually unlimited reserves of energy, including from traditional fuels, LNG, clean coal, next generation nuclear power, and gas hydrate technologies. At the same time, I'm proud to report the United States is among the cleanest air and drinking water on Earth, and we're going to keep it that way. And we just came out with a report that at this moment, it's the cleanest it's been in the last 40 years. We're committed to conserving the majesty of God's creation and the natural beauty of our world. Today, I'm pleased to announce the United States will join 1 Trillion Trees initiative being launched here at the World Economic Forum. 1 trillion trees. This is not a time for pessimism. This is a time for optimism. Fear and doubt is not a good thought process, because this is a time for tremendous hope and joy and optimism and action. But to embrace the possibilities of tomorrow, we must reject the perennial prophets of doom and their predictions of the apocalypse. These alarmists always demand the same thing: absolute power to dominate, transform, and control every aspect of our lives. We will never let radical socialists destroy our economy, wreck our country.
Oh, my goodness. That was Trump. How about that?
There it is. I mean, so a lot of people, one part of the clip, for those who actually listened to the entirety of his speech, he ended up what appeared to be being very braggadocious about U.S. economic performance, and that rubbed some people the wrong way. But in terms of the clip we just played, I actually like what he had to say in terms of energy sources, specifically nuclear energy. Mm-hmm. The fact that we have a world leader openly talking about how that is a green solution. Yeah. Because so many different jurisdictions have been scared away by what I would argue is misguided environmentalists who lump nuclear energy into what they criticize. And so for him to say, no, we do care, and we are including nuclear energy in the mix is a huge step forward, because you have entire developed economies like Germany who have banned what is otherwise the most reliable and cleanest energy source. And so a breath of fresh air from Trump. I'm not much of a Trump supporter myself, but to hear him be the voice of reason on that, I think is a big positive.
And I think especially hearing that first part is, I don't think that's often said enough for people who don't like things like the Green New Deals. They don't come out and say, look, we're in favor of the environment. We want to protect our rivers and oceans. Yep. We want everything to be cleaner. We want our air to be cleaner. We just disagree on how to get there and what we can do. And I think that's where there has to be much more of a conversation. And as you said, using nuclear, throwing that in there, that's big. I don't know if, again, that's going to be the big takeaway. It's more the latter part of the clip that we heard, talking about the prophets of doom.
What a saying.
Yeah.
Whoever wrote that deserves a raise, because that is some AAA grade speech writing.
Yeah, we'll hear about this writer in many years when they have their own book. But
yes.
Man, I got to tell you, this was good, and I think the bragging about the economy, that's kind of what it is. If you're there as a world leader, you're there to kind of sell your country.
Yeah,
hey, we've got a great workforce, we've got great institutions.
Yep.
We're the place that you want to bring your multi-billion-dollar business. Trump doesn't always need to do that, obviously, but that in his role is kind of what he likes to do. He likes to sell. He's a seller, right?
Yeah, and I don't really mind having a world leader be a cheerleader for their country and for commerce and for doing business in the United States. I think that's an appropriate role. One could argue in terms of his rhetoric, he's created a scenario where he doesn't necessarily get the benefit of the doubt.
Sure.
Maybe deservedly so, but I have no issue with him taking the stage and talking about the apparent successes of the U.S. economy. I think that's appropriate.
Yeah, and to give a sort of nice jab to a lot of the people who are talking about sustainability and the environment. How much is it going to be about practical solutions? Because everything that I saw and read, it's all about transformation, but what does that really mean? And nuclear is something that is an option. It's there. It's concrete. What a lot of people are talking about when they're talking about changes, and Trump does mention that, is complete structural changes in the way our society works. It's not necessarily that, the investments are the problem or we just don't have the technology yet, so how do we get to that technology? It's what are we doing wrong and how we structure ourselves, or how much we're paying to the system that we can change in order to get to that next level.
Yeah, it's almost never about solutions, and if it is about solutions, it's about solutions that are just not viable yet. So, like, I'm totally in favor of solar energy, but are we able to power the U.S. economy on solar energy?
Yeah.
No, not yet.
We'd have to turn the entire state of California into nothing at all but these huge solar energy grids and panels. And considering all the rules and regulations in California, they can't contain any plastic. Can't contain any other bad materials. That'd be against Prop 65.
No, and if you use oil and gas in the manufacturing process, then you got another problem.
Oh, Lord Almighty. Yeah, that's it. So, it's not going to come out of there. But, you're right. How much of it is practical solutions? How much of it is things that we can change now? And that was sort of the criticism that came out of, or that was kind of echoed by the media, but brought out by Greta Thunberg, the idea that everyone talks about it, but what has actually been done? Now, most of the sort of world environmentalist ilk would prefer to just see large carbon taxes, which we know from every study ever conducted, this would do absolutely nothing. What are we going to do when we have carbon taxes?
Well, and the big thing here is that a lot of these countries who really strongly advocate for a carbon tax, if their emissions were zero, they're not really going to make any type of dent in global emissions, because the emissions come from, for the most part, developing countries like China and India, who use natural resources predominantly in their development. Those countries argue that it would be unfair for them to make the shift because they haven't had the chance to develop yet, and I'm sympathetic to that argument.
Sure.
So we got to ask the question, okay, well, how can we lean on the private market and entrepreneurs and innovators to solve questions about battery energy storage, to solve these questions about pollution and air quality? And once we figure that out, how do we help that technology become widespread? I think that's a much more appropriate response to the questions about climate change and pollution and all of that jazz. Is what do we do in terms of figuring out what the solutions are and how do we make them as widespread as possible? That's not the narrative we really hear here at the WEF. It's mostly what do we stop people from doing?
Yeah, it's a lot of virtue signaling. A lot of look over here. Here's exactly what we have on the table. Let's not look at what's happening behind the scenes. Let's not look at what we're actually doing in terms of our investments.
Ignore the fact that I flew here on a private jet.
Exactly. You're listening to Consumer Choice Radio on the Big Talker 106.7 FM. Here live from Davos, Switzerland, talking about the World Economic Forum. David, we went through a good list. One thing that we have on here is kind of what was missing. What did we not see here that we thought we would? Are there particular companies, countries? To give you the background on how the week works, there are the official events that we mentioned that are on the main stage with Trump and Greta Thunberg and world leaders and big CEOs, JP Morgan, all of this. But then there are these side events that are much more fun, we would admit, but it's normal companies like Salesforce, Cloudflare, Facebook, just all these companies that rent an entire shop or restaurant in downtown Davos, take it over for the entire week. They pay the kind of owners off, and they have coffee or they'll have some swag or magazines, and you can talk and meet with people there. So you saw normal tech firms. Who else are the big players that we saw here? Microsoft.
Yep, Google.
Google as well. They have their own kind of pavilion and a lot of companies and then a lot of countries as well. So you have like the Turkish house or Ukraine house. So you have the actual government that has shelled out the money to rent a building so that they can talk about people investing in their countries. But who are kind of the groups or people that you thought we would see here that weren't?
Well, I think what we were largely missing is anyone to carry the banner for trade. That was just a concept that, for the most part, was ignored. And when you bring together the business elites of the world, you bring together world leaders and politicians, I think that you should have a conversation about how do we enhance free trade, how do we lift more people out of poverty, how do we continue to make the world a more interconnected place? I think that was missing. I'm not sure which companies would carry that banner, but I'm sure that there are countless ones who should, and they should see the opportunity of being here to
I think we mentioned that Trump and the U.S. delegation were not here last year. Another group missing is the United Kingdom and their government. So they're actually, I saw the tweet this morning or yesterday that the law just got royal decree. So Brexit officially happens January 31.
Now, I mean, actually, you raise a very good point in terms of where representation could have been. Imagine a pavilion or an expose here in Davos that was Britain after Brexit, highlighting business opportunities, how to trade. I mean, I know that I don't know what her appropriate title is, but she would, I think, be the trade minister of the UK, Liz Truss, has spent much of the last few months basically traveling around the world and trying to position the UK as best it can post-Brexit and say, we want a trade deal with you, we want a trade deal with you, we want a trade deal with you. It would have been great if they had some sort of presence here and said, hey guys, Britain is still open for business.
You know what that reminds me? They were big last year. I don't know about a house, but I do remember at the hotel, Maine sponsoring. They had big banners in the city.
Even at the airport, you land in Zurich, and it was Britain after Brexit. I mean, that would have been just a huge opportunity for them.
Trade deals are still big. I mean, you have to remember TTIP, all these things were not able to get ratified, were not passed in the end. And these are great circumstances for trade. Ideally, instead of just coming here and hobnobbing and drinking champagne, a lot of these guys would just sign the trade deals right there. We would have free trade.
I mean, imagine if one of these main stage sessions at the WEF was Britain signing a trade deal with the United States and highlighting the cooperation and the agreement that they're going to have, or with countries like Canada, New Zealand, Australia. That would have been fantastic. And I think it would have been actually in the true spirit of the World Economic Forum in terms of bringing people together.
So I think we definitely were missing the trade aspect. Another one that I had thought about before is, we saw almost no transportation companies. We saw no car companies necessarily. There weren't a huge contingent of Ford and Toyota. I think you said you saw Hyundai, or one of our colleagues saw Hyundai here. But you didn't really have that. And if we're talking about the global conversation is climate change and how to change everything with our transportation, and everyone has to take a train now instead of planes. And what are we going to do about cars? Where are the next trains coming out of? You don't see Bombardier or Siemens. Actually, they were not here either, as far as I know.
No, I don't think they were. And I mean, even on the car side of things, some of these companies are coming out with low emission vehicles or no emission vehicles, which would have been, I mean, if you had asked somebody 15 years ago whether these numbers were even possible, they would have laughed at you.
Yeah.
And so it would have been nice to see them represented and talking about how innovation is solving some of the sustainability problem, very much in the light of obviously how you and I think, but I think that would have added a lot to the conversation.
That's true. And that's to have those additional companies. Again, this is just to have the forum so that these ideas can be discussed. One of the greatest things about being here, and one of the main reasons why we're here, is we were able to host a number of events. We were able to, after much planning, many months, many head-scratching evenings by David here, we were able to get something together.
Yep.
And I think we're one of the only groups in the world doing this, and this is the Grand Cannabis Conclave.
Yes.
So, David, tell us a little bit about that. I know for many listeners, particularly in North Carolina, who are listening right now on the radio, they might hear cannabis and get scared, but I promise you, this is awesome. This is the wave of the future, and this is how things will actually develop and go in a positive way. So tell us about that.
Absolutely. So this beautiful restaurant on this beautiful mountainside restaurant, we hosted 100 industry leaders, high-level investors and policymakers to talk about medical and recreational cannabis internationally. So highlighting where various U.S. states have had success, highlighting the European market, what's gone on in Canada. And it was just an unbelievable experience, an amazing backdrop. The conversations that are had at an event like that between executives or between investors, that's what really helps fuel the legalization debate moving forward. And I've always said, in order to really have success here on what consumer-friendly and patient-friendly legalization looks like, you have to bring together policymakers who are interested or open to hearing the arguments. We certainly had that. Investors who want to invest in the space, whether because they believe in the cause or simply because they want to make money. And thirdly, entrepreneurs and companies that have skin in the game who also want to pursue this end goal. And so that is the event that we hosted. It was tremendously successful. I think the best headline covering the event was actually out of Belgium. One of the national reporters there who was in attendance at the event said that the Cannabis Conclave was the rebellious part of Davos, and specifically said that these things are not necessarily talked about in the World Economic Forum, but that Davos has a sharper and more daring edge. And he did an expose on what goes on at the Cannabis Conclave. So the global elite, in air quotes, are listening. Investors are listening. Policymakers are listening.
Sure.
And now the media is listening. So
a sharper, more daring edge. That is Consumer Choice Center hosting the Cannabis Conclave in Davos.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow. Good promo for the next year, everybody. So
yes,
that'll work out very well.
Yeah, yes. And we will be back in Davos for 2021, so very excited about that.
And I think, we had a lot of partners, we had a lot of people there, we're on the mountain. And again, this was a fairly open event. We did not require badges, white badges of $100,000 for people to enter.
Nope.
It really was interested people who follow this topic, who have some kind of interest in it and believe in its capabilities, believe in its legitimacy. I mean, that's huge for cannabis on the world level, where people are still being jailed for using cannabis around the world.
Yeah, and just the general consensus that prohibition doesn't work, and how do we figure out a way forward that obviously ensures consumer safety, but isn't so cruel in terms of arresting people. And I mean, one anecdote is, you mentioned the white badges, and we didn't require white badges to enter our event, but there were certainly folks with white badges in attendance at the conclave. And
Can you imagine that? You drop $100,000 on a white badge ticket to go to the World Economic Forum in Davos. You fly hundreds of miles, thousands of miles. You're there to hear Trump, hear Greta, hear all these big CEOs. You'd rather go see this awesome event by these activists at the Consumer Choice Center of the Cannabis Conclave.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a lot to want to skip out on that general content that you've paid so much for, to travel up the mountain to hear us and some of our great sponsors speak about the issue, but people certainly did, and so that was great. It adds to the event, and it just means that in terms of this conversation, we're winning.
Yeah, winning all the way. And I think that's why we're excited to be able to tell you these stories. I mean, hey, how many groups that you know are working on the field of not only cannabis policy, but everything great that's happening with the activism around it. So this is Consumer Choice Radio here on the Big Talker FM 106.7. We've been giving you some of the updates from the World Economic Forum here in Davos, Switzerland, where we're live. You can hear much more about this and subscribe to the podcast, everything we've got going on consumerchoiceradio.com. We had this great and very successful cannabis event, and if any of you are interested in this, we're going to get the website up for the next year event, cannabisconclave.com. David will be your point man there, so you can definitely talk to him about that if interested. And then we hosted a nice little dinner. This was amongst friends and allies. Now, the course of this dinner, and we've spoken about this before, Consumer Choice Center in our work, not only are we there to be active for lifestyle freedom, for health, for mobility, and really for consumer choice, we also want to make sure that we put out enough data, enough information, and enough media points about authoritarian regimes and how they are a threat to consumer freedom. We see that now with the rise of many technology companies that are pretty much in bed with the Chinese Communist Party, and we wanted to figure out who we can kind of partner with, sort of ideas for the future about how to counter this, how consumers can kind of protect themselves against authoritarian regimes and a lot of things that happen there.
Yeah, and for the most part, there are not enough policymakers highlighting this. I think the real MVP of the Trump administration has been the FCC chairman Ajit Pai, who has written at length about how if firms linked to the Communist Party cannot handle criticism from a MBA owner, how can we integrate them into a 5G network? Obviously, we want open trade and we want to do business with Chinese people and those who are unfortunately living under communist rule. But at the same time, it also highlights maybe a bit of nuance, because you have to ask the question in terms of that link to government, which is a real problem. And so we had a great dinner, got to listen to some absolutely fantastic people share their experiences and just talk about what's next and talk about how we can be more conscious as consumers in terms of the overreach from the Communist Party in China.
Yeah, and I think it's a very important topic, and obviously it's of concern for many people because a lot of the companies now that are providing, it is true, a lot of innovation are out there, but there are still concerns about intellectual property. Yep. There are issues really dealing with security. David, you and I are Canadian citizens, so if we go to China, who knows? There's a lot of people that are being scooped up and many charges that are just kind of arbitrarily thrown on them.
Yeah, I mean, there are two Canadians who are still sitting in prison from our perspective, doing nothing, solely as a bargaining chip to get back one of Huawei's executives who is facing an extradition hearing in Vancouver. And so it can be scary times, and I think we have to have a conversation about how we can make the world more interconnected, while not ceding ground on the democratic values that make countries like Canada and the United States great.
Exactly, and that's why it's always about the authoritarian regime, the Communist Party. These are really the entities that have a lot of the power, and in a sense are corrupting what could be very open and free trade, which I think nobody would love more than us. Yeah. If we look at the state of North Carolina, where this show is broadcast out of, if we imagine China as a market for the soybeans, the grains, all the amazing pork that comes out of North Carolina, it'd be huge. There's great demand. Just right now, we're in the midst of a trade war, and it's not the best time to try to go out there and be selling your products between these areas. There's a lot of stories that came out of Davos specifically We're obviously hearing a lot more about what's happening with the coronavirus in China, sort of their reaction to that, whether it was appropriate or not. I think our managing director, Fred Roda, who's a health economist, can probably understand that a bit better. We're actually going to talk to him next week. We're going to talk about some of the campaigns that we're putting together, specifically in the area of health and pharma transparency. So we'll hear a lot about there. But, this is the place to be, Davos. I mean, we're sitting in a nice Airbnb that we rented out in Klosters, just down the road. It's very, very difficult to get a spot. I mean, this took some planning. I think it was a year ahead that we had to book this. Yeah,
it does certainly take some coordination and some logistics to make something like this happen.
And even there are people that I would meet. You just meet them, in a shuttle van or just, walking down the street. There are people who just heard it was a great event, hopped on a plane, showed up, zero plans. Oh, I think I'm in a hotel room. End up having to find a hotel 2.5 hours away, either back in Zurich or some other small town, or sometimes because we're near the border, they have to go to Austria or Liechtenstein. It's crazy.
I mean, actually, there are two kind of both unfortunate stories that came out this week. The first was a hotel fiasco. I'm not sure if you heard about this, Yaël, but essentially one hotel double booked every room in the hotel. So there were something like 100 or so WEF goers who showed up. They arrived, bags in tow, got to the front desk of their hotel. And the hotel manager said, "Oh, sorry, we don't have your reservation, even though you already paid."
Wow. All right. Talk about consumers having to face the bill, and then at the end of the day, we got nowhere to sleep.
Yeah. Sorry, guys.
And David, were these white badge holders?
My understanding is yes. This was a formal WEF goers who.
These are elites. Wow.
Yeah. So imagine being the Prime Minister of Luxembourg, getting kicked out of an event, and then being double booked in your hotel.
They're not going to have very, very good TripAdvisor reviews after that. I'll tell you that right now.
Oh, God. No, I hope not.
Yeah. So there's probably a lot more. Is there any other kind of big stories that you picked on of?
I mean, the other big story, I think it was Monday morning, essentially 2 Russian spies were caught in Davos. What happened was they were pretending to be plumbers, and when they were confronted by Swiss police, who are particularly good at their jobs in terms of ensuring that this is a secure place to be. They were confronted by Swiss police. Obviously, the Swiss police had figured out who they were, and they handed in their diplomatic passports, and they turned around and they left the country. That was actually about someone who you mentioned that we saw, Bill Browder, because the expectation was that they were possibly going to Davos to pursue him or to bother him or God knows what.
Yeah, he came out on Twitter and says that he likely believes it was tied to him.
Yeah.
Not sure it came from that. But and I think it was that story happened on Monday.
Yeah.
And I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday walking back, we saw him walking down the hill.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty crazy. I mean, it also kind of ties into the reach of authoritarian regimes.
We see there's an interview here with Deutsche Welle, with Bill Browder here. He says, Russia is such a corrupt country that it's not a place you can invest. Russia's most wanted man, once one of the biggest foreign investors, talking to Deutsche Welle in Davos. And he's got a beautiful sort of background of the Davos forest and mountain. Oh, man, that's crazy. Yeah, I mean, this would be the perfect hot spot if you are, the perfect spy game. It would be a great place to be, no doubt. You've got a lot of people. I mean, we thought about that the other night. If you were to set up your own facial recognition software program right in downtown Davos on the street, so much data you could pick up.
Oh, yeah. It would be a treasure trove of data, which is kind of why it's important for us to talk about consumer choice, but also talk about things like human rights and the overreach of some of these authoritarian governments.
Of course, and if they're going to have an impact in a nice, peaceful, and neutral country such as Switzerland, that should give us pause. I mean, there's a reason that this big conference is hosted here. It's obviously a neutral place. There's a lot of huge, again, trade agreements, nuclear agreements that are signed in places like Switzerland.
Yep.
This kind of a good place for people to come together, and I think that's why it's been great for us to come here. Again, we're not white badge holders. We're not multi-millionaires or billionaires, billionaires and millionaires, as Bernie would say. We're just activists who believe in this. We're professionals who actually have been advocating for consumer choice for a long time. So there's a great number of campaigns that are obviously they're gonna get a lot of inspiration out of our trip here. Yep. There's going to be much more to come. In terms of everything that's been happening, it's been a super full week. I mean, let's just go through some of the things that were done here. We had so many events put on by particular companies. We had, there were some that were just drink sessions, some were actual dinners, some were some of these houses that we talked about where you just kind of go in and check out some of their literature. I know Microsoft was giving out all kinds of lotion and candies and all these kind of things, and then you got to see their new drone technology or their medical technology. So that stuff was pretty cool. I mean, the very interesting ones always have some aspect that's tied to consumer goods, things that we can buy and purchase. And
how do we make lives better for everybody?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very cool aspect. Definitely there's a good amount of innovation. There always could have been a lot more. I mean, we all love swag.
Yes.
But what's better than just like a VR experience or something like that? There could have been even a bit more of that.
I mean, there was some of that on the cultural side too. I think one of my favorite events this week was Indonesia Night, which was an expose hosted by the Indonesian government talking about how they're more open for trade, how they're more open to a global world. That, in my opinion, is fantastic to see them have a kind of vested interest in opening up that country to the rest of the world. That's the type of stuff I want to see. That's the type of stuff. Those are the conversations I want to have.
Yeah, and I wonder if it is kind of worth it for them. They're able to spend. That's probably at least a couple $1 million to rent a whole place. Whatever it is, and get all the bottles of wine and food and everything else. Yeah. And I tell you, I promise, guys, those of you listening, we're not elitists. We're just able to get cheap flights and show up and somehow sneak into many of these events.
Yeah, we're the ordinary folk in the room.
The ordinary folk in the room. You can say that about all the listeners, but I think you guys go above and beyond because you're listening to Consumer Choice Radio on the Big Talker FM. We're live here Saturdays at 10 o'clock, consumerchoiceradio.com. There's a lot of stories that are going to come out of Davos. David mentioned one of the media hits that we were able to get as Consumer Choice Center. I'm hoping we're going to have a little bit more. We've got some great video footage as well.
Yeah.
I mean, the chalet that we had, the restaurant, we were able to have the Cannabis Conclave. Just so many people love this place, enjoy the event so much.
It's hard for listeners for us to actually visually describe what it looks like, so we're going to have to add some pictures onto the show's website so you guys can get a feel for what it looks like. But it's truly beautiful. I mean, with the Alps in the background, the snow. Then we actually had a couple of people ski down the mountain to the event and show up in full kind of ski outfits, which was quite hilarious to see.
Yes, that was super cool. I mean, you can imagine, again, that we're up on the mountain. You have to take the gondola, the funicular gondola. You need to take that to go up the mountain. And again, a ticket is not much. We're talking like 8 francs, so something like $9.
Yeah.
You have to go up the mountain, get off, and while you're trying to get to the restaurant, you kind of need to duck a couple of skiers and snowboarders who are going around. But then you're able to get up top, and you have a nice restaurant, great seating. If any of you have ever traveled to Europe and been in the Alps, and you might have seen some of these ski lodges. I mean, obviously you have this in Colorado and Whistler and all these other places. But man, just beautiful views, great place to be. I think the fact that we, as our own organization based in the U.S., kind of with activists, with professionals who are doing stuff on both continents, even more continents, to actually see that work and to see the people come together under our banner in Davos is just amazing. Yeah. So I think probably one of the greatest events I hope that will come out of this, specifically for media attention. I think we're going to get a couple more articles, and I think demand next year, David, is going to be at the top of the chart. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the reason why we already announced that we're going to come back. We were at standing room only, so at capacity. I think that there's going to be a lot of interest in the event, and super excited to be back and continuing that conversation.
Yeah, so that's Davos for you. Hopefully we kind of explained it well. I'm pretty sure all the other radio shows or podcasts you listen will be incredibly boring to talk about that. Because I read through the press a little bit, and it was just, what did Trump say? What did Greta say? What did this world leader say? And actually nothing about the experience. Nothing about what it's like to be on the promenade when you're ducking through the various buildings and houses and who's giving out what swag. And then it's great because then you see people from different countries coming together to buy their 20 franc pizza, at the restaurant.
Yeah. All of a sudden, you're in line for food and David Cameron, the former Prime Minister of the UK, is behind you in line, or
Oh yeah, and he'll stay behind. You'll be behind, so where's your title now? Yeah, and I think Prince Charles as well was kind of making up a storm, and
he actually got called out pretty good on his hypocrisy, because he's an environmentalist at his core, and that's totally legitimate, but it is a bit rich for him to fly here on the private jet to lecture.
Sorry, that's his Her Majesty's private jet.
To lecture us.
He had to come on
ordinary.
Mommy's plane.
Yeah, maybe soon to be his plane. We'll see.
No, I think she's holding out to make sure it goes right to William. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff with the monarchy, and there's definitely probably a lot of royals here. Even more than the British.
Yes, I can only assume.
The number of monarchies that there are, in Europe, some in Africa, definitely the Middle East. Apparently, the Middle East sort of representation was not as strong as it had been in the past.
Yeah, I don't know why that was the case. I think last year there certainly was. There were exposés and exhibits for,
and you just saw more sheiks. Let's be honest. You just saw more guys who obviously had the traditional Arab garb and headgear, and you didn't see as much this year. I'm not sure if maybe they're just sending the cousins down the line and doing smaller deals, or who knows? This is the elite might be gathering here, but sometimes maybe the stuff is happening back home. We have no clue.
Yep.
So, hopefully it's a good wrap-up on Davos. We'll have more info again. If you'd like to follow any of our social media, Consumer Choice C on Twitter, you can find us there, consumerchoiceradio.com. David, we want to get through some Twitter recommendations. We actually skipped this last week. We wanted to hit up a couple of people that we could recommend on the tweeters. For those of you who have Twitter or would like to just creep along and read it, I think it's a good opportunity. Last 2 weeks ago, I had some very good recommendations. I think I got one good one I'd go to, but I'll go with you, David, first.
Yeah, so I do have one, and I'm probably going to butcher his name, but I'll spell it out. So it's Siraj Hashmi. He's with the Washington Examiner. And if you are a fan of a good hot take on any particular issue, he is the ultimate takesman. He's quite funny. He's usually to the point in terms of being on at least what I would see as the right side of any given issue, but just hilarious. I mean, for those who engage in Twitter and see all of the doom and gloom and all of the negativity, he is certainly a beacon of hope in terms of some good comedic content. And so you can follow him at Siraj, which is Siraj, Hashmi, which is HASHMI.
I thought you mispronounced hashtag. But
No.
Okay. All right. So I have one recommendation. We actually talked about him earlier on the program, and that's Bjorn Lomborg.
Yes.
So he's a Danish political scientist, published the book The Skeptical Environmentalist, and he's the president and founder of the Copenhagen Consensus Center. So he's at Bjorn Lomborg. That's BJORN LOMBORG. So a lot of great stuff. He was able to provide that cartoon.
Yeah, and one of the things that's interesting about Bjorn is he's actually one of the reasons why I got interested in politics. I think I was probably in high school, and my dad had.
Wow.
I don't know if my dad had read the book or just suggested that I look into this guy, and he is incredible because he just looks at the bare bones of how much we spend on particular things, and looks for efficiencies and how we can solve global problems like malaria, all sorts of these really pressing issues, whether it's vaccination so that people don't get various diseases, how we handle Ebola. He's just got such a rational perspective where he looks at what we're spending and what we get in a very cost-benefit analysis way. And I think that, that is a very appropriate way to approach politics, regardless of whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, someone who favors more government, someone who favors less government. I think we should always evaluate government policy in terms of cost-benefit analysis. So I can't recommend him enough.
Yeah, he's great. He was a column that he wrote And, he actually talks a lot about Davos. I'm sure he's been here once or twice. It'd be cool to maybe hook up with him next year. And, hey, maybe he'll be a Consumer Choice Radio guest here in the few. We might actually reach out to him.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
He's got one column that came out right before, I guess, the beginning of the year that talks about just sort of how empty gestures, what you're trying to do to solve climate change aren't going to do much. Even if we all change our light bulbs, if we all go out and buy a Toyota Prius, this is just not going to make the change in global emissions that we wish. And the kind of project that you mentioned before is the new book project that they came out with is how to spend $75 billion to make the world a better place. Yep. And he sat down with many economists, some who were even Nobel laureate winners, and said, look, guys, if we had $75 billion, what can we do to make the most good? And it had nothing to do with carbon or doing any of this. It had everything to do with providing mosquito nets, with malaria treatments, trying to do education on food and everything around hygiene.
Yep. Proper cooking practices.
It would have nothing to do
underdeveloped areas. Yeah,
it'd have nothing to do with trying to change the global economy and carbon taxes and all the rest. So he's a great follow. Yeah, definitely someone that I would recommend. And then another one, we're gonna shout out to hometown boy here, Joe Catanacci.
Yes.
At Joe Cats 19. He's host of the Joe Catanacci Show that you guys hear every single morning from 7 to 10 throughout the week here on Big Talker FM. You get to hear all the great insight from Joe. Luckily, I've been able to talk with him a little bit and have a good insight. So he's a great fan and a good friend of Consumer Choice Radio. So I would recommend Joe. He doesn't talk about his tweets enough.
He is what we would call a friend of the show.
He's a friend of the Joe Catanacci, friend of the show.
Friend of the show.
At Joe Cats 19. You can find him there.
Yes.
Joe, good man. So we've got more recommendations. We're going to have some more guests as well coming up in the next couple of weeks. Again, we had to take the show a little mobile this week to be in Switzerland, but we've definitely got some great guests, great people putting together. There might be some even better people that we can recommend here in the future. Yeah.
Another guest we may have in the future, another recommended Twitter follower is Brad Palumbo. Brad_Palumbo. He is also with the Examiner in D.C., also writes for Quillette.
You're all on Examiner today.
Well,
so first he had the British crush. So you only had British Twitter recs, but now it's like we're going just for Washington Examiner.
Yes, yeah. He's particularly good. One of those younger, edgier writers who likes to shake it up on Twitter. What he writes is almost always on point. Certainly a good dude to follow.
Yeah, definitely. And if you have any recommendations that you might have out there in the world, go to Consumer Choice Radio. You can find our contact, our emails there. Contact the show. Let us know. Maybe some of these people we can have on the program and talk about consumer issues, talk about ways that the government is trying to seek its teeth into something that's near and dear to your heart.
I think we should probably also say you should follow both of us on Twitter, and if you ever have any suggestions on who you want to hear, people you want us to interview, maybe topics that we missed, definitely reach out to us, tweet at us. And we'll do our best to try and incorporate some of that into the discussion, or some of these guests, at least reach out to them and have them on, because it's always great to tap into the knowledge of some of these experts on a particular issue.
Yeah, and you are at Clement Liberty.
Correct.
So that's Clement Liberty. And I am at Yaël, OSS, Yael. OSS, plenty of things there. You can find out more about some of the things that we are reading throughout the week, or kind of nice events that we're going to. Obviously, we've got enough of, motivation now to do many things throughout the next couple of weeks. So it's going to be great to get some guests on, hopefully talk more about this. I mentioned that we'll have Fred Roda, who's one of our colleagues here at Consumer Choice Center. We'll have Bill Wietz on eventually, our Luxembourgish friend. Unfortunately, we weren't able to interview him for this program, but we'll get him on, and many more of our colleagues doing great work, not only right here in the United States, but around the world. So I think great stuff to come there. Good stories. There's always going to be something that will pop up in the news that we'll be able to maybe get some expert analysis on. I mean, this is the kind of the struggle that we have every day in the life of a consumer choice activist, right, David?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so the times are coming together now. We just got a couple minutes here, a couple of stories that we wanted to hit through. Davos obviously was huge, a big thing. We talked a little bit about what's going on with the situation in China, Hong Kong. What are some that you've got kind of
so
way?
there was a good exchange between Elizabeth Warren and a father of a university student. So she has the plan to cancel all student debt. And the father, and I'm paraphrasing, had basically said, well, between him and his child, they had saved money or something along those lines to basically cover the cost of student loans. And so he asked, rightfully, well, where do I get debt forgiveness, or do I get some compensation? Or are you going to punish me and not give me any type of compensation because I did the right thing and I saved? And so it really put Elizabeth Warren in a bind, because it highlights the issue of what her plan is, and with the economics term is moral hazard, right? You want to encourage people to save, to pay for the things that the debt that they take on. And now if you just cancel all student debt, essentially what you're doing is just bailing all of these people out at the expense of the people who were not quite as irresponsible or reckless, if we describe it that way.
Definitely. Let's see if we can get this clip playing here. This is what the guy said when he confronted her.
My daughter's getting out of school. I saved all my money. She doesn't have any student loans.
That's going to be hard to understand. Yeah, I think you just have to watch the clip. We'll go ahead and link that at consumerchoiceradio.com so you can kind of see that. But yeah, it's really making the world turn. I mean, it's these are the kind of things that I think a lot of people care about. Obviously, student debt, huge for a lot of people. Many of you listening are probably refreshing your browser to see your total balance of student loans and figuring out the interest rate and what you can cut next month so you can pay a bit more. I mean, it's tough. It's hard. I think, if we're to have a kind of Warren-type plan, it's going to be great for the young Zoomers, who are going to be graduating in a couple years. But what happens to you?
Yeah, if you're a listener and I mean, you paid your way through college, or you've paid back most of your debt because you were frugal in terms of your expenses, it's a real disservice to you, because they're just punishing you for doing the right thing. And I can totally understand. I mean, some of these college debts in the United States are hundreds of thousands of dollars, but just simply canceling student debt doesn't actually do anything to address the issue of rising costs, which is where these huge loans come from.
Yeah, so, where's the source? Why is this a problem in the first place? It's never examined. It's that usually the answer that comes from the crowd, that surrounds people like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren is, well, let's just throw more money at it, or the government should take this over.
And that's part of the problem in terms of the U.S. college system, is that these guaranteed federal loans have basically given schools a free pass to inflate tuition each year, where they become $35,000, $40,000 a year, where if loans were not guaranteed, you'd see that downward pressure, because you'd see that correction. They wouldn't get away with being exorbitant in that way, and you'd have some downward pressure, and things would become more affordable. And I think that's something that everyone should agree upon, in terms of trying to make it as affordable as possible. By maybe scaling back some of these guarantees, you add a bit of a market force to it, some competition.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people make the point about, should you even go to the 4-year university? Maybe it's community college, maybe it's more technical trade school. Definitely, if any of you would love to get more involved in consumer choice issues and, see what you can do to influence the next generation, hey, we've got open spots. We can provide training, all the best.
Yeah. I mean,
that's real world experience.
Yeah, that's definitely something from the Canadian side of things, where the perception is that everyone has to go to university. And then you have a trades gap. You don't have the labor for people who do your what is necessary, your blue collar work, the people who are fixing the machines, the people who are using their hands to do everything from dig telephone pole holes to mechanics and some of the jobs that maybe people turn their nose up a little bit, and I think wrongfully so. It'd be nice to see some of that transition and discussion in the education debate federally in the U.S. is saying, well, do we really need everybody to go to university, or can we incorporate some trades in here and some diversification in terms of what we expect?
Yeah, or just be Russian plumbers who get caught by the Swiss police in Davos, Switzerland. Yeah, so you've been listening to Consumer Choice Radio here on the Big Talker 106.7 FM. David, it's been a great hour, my man.
It has. Until next week. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, it's been great to have everyone on. Please continue to listen to the show. You can find out more about our podcast version on Spotify. You can find this with your RSS, Overcast, Apple Podcasts. You can find it everywhere on our website, consumerchoiceradio.com. We're going to have some great shows coming up for you. But in the meantime, we've got to go back and pack our bags and get out of Switzerland, David. How does that sound?
Yeah, it's time to go. Time to go home.
Time to go home. Time to Pied the Piper and fly the jet.
Yeah, not a private one, unfortunately.
No, not this time. But we'll see what happens. Thanks again to all the listeners. Continue to follow us. Thanks again for all your support. For those of you who are listening, we're getting some very good comments. So Great things to come. Thanks, everyone, so much, and we'll talk to you soon.